So I told you that we had outstanding speakers for today, and now we have our second one. Her name is Dr. Temple Grandin. She comes to us from Colorado State University, where she is a professor of animal science in the College of Agricultural Sciences. She has designed livestock facilities in the United States, Canada, Europe, Mexico, Australia, New Zealand, and other countries. Ms. Grandin has developed an objective scoring system for assessing handling of cattle and pigs at meat plants. This scoring system helps with animal welfare. She obtained her BA at Franklin Pierce College and her MS in animal science at Arizona State University. She received her PhD in animal science from the University of Illinois. Dr. Temple Grandin has a one-of-a-kind mind. She is a world-renowned spokesperson for autism and an advocate for humane livestock handling. She is a professor, an author, a role model for young women, and much more. So among her honors and recognitions are that she was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame in 2017. She has appeared on television and honored in magazines like 2020, Today Show, CNN, 60 Minutes, News and World Report, Time Magazine, New York Times, Forbes, US News, and I've only done about half of them, and many more. And now we have her here with us. We are so pleased to have you with us today, Dr. Temple Grandin. Dr. Grandin.
Well, it's great to be here, and maybe you could turn my video on because you've got my video blocked. Okay, now I'm on, and I'm got a lot of things to talk about today, and then I think we'll just open it up for questions. I've worked now for about 50 years in the cattle industry. I've done a lot of work on improving how animals are treated, and one of the biggest obstacles I had. Wait a minute, is my video on? Okay, what's going on here? Everything working? I'm getting a note that the video's off. Okay, is everything working? Can someone verify? Hello?
Yes, everything's working. Just let me know when you want to put the slides on.
Oh, okay, we can probably put the slides on right now.
Okie dokie.
See, I wasn't sure if things were working, and I've got some slides that I showed educators, and I also show these slides to businesses. I've been doing a lot of talks to businesses, companies like S&P, Bureau of Land Management, Dell Computer, medical device companies, because I have two things I'm working on now. At the age of almost 75, is I want to get people with autism into good careers. That's something that I really want to work on. Well, I do a lot of talks with parents, and the reason why I've got this little kid here is we need to be getting kids outside doing things, and then they grow up into people that want to do things. And one of the big problems I'm seeing autism is a parent gets a diagnosis of autism, they don't think their kid's capable of doing anything. And I think that's a really serious problem. And go on to the next slide, where he learns how the water comes out the other end of the drain from the roof of our building, which just shows you that the most mundane things can be used to teach things. But one of the big problems I'm seeing is people get locked into labels. And I came out with a book with Deborah Moore called Navigating Autism. And the purpose of this book is to get parents, especially of young children, to get out of the mindset that maybe a kid just can't do anything. We can go to the next slide. And the thing I want to ask, and this is more from an autism perspective, is what would happen to some of our top innovators today? What would happen to them? And I can tell you, in my field, being a woman was 10 times the barrier of autism. Autism back in the 70s was a non-issue. There were lots and lots of people with undiagnosed autism working in the construction industry, lots and lots of them. But I'm concerned that a lot of very talented students, and I'm really interested in students right now, just ending up kind of going nowhere because they don't get exposed to enough stuff to find out what they might want to do. I get asked all the time on how did I get involved in the cattle industry? I got involved in the cattle industry because I got exposed to it. So let's look at how people get into careers. It starts out with kids getting exposed to things. And then the next step is mentoring. And I had some wonderful mentors. I've got to really thank all the teachers that worked with me, like a science teacher, a contractor who saw my abilities and seeked me out. We can go on to the next slide. I have grandparents coming up to me all the time and they find out that they're autistic when the kids get diagnosed. That's just happening all the time. Now, where a diagnosis can help later on in life is with relationships. Then you figure out, well, maybe why your marriage isn't going so well and relationship issues. And when I was in high school and I was bullied and teased, where I got friends was friends through shared interests. Really, really important. Get together with the other people. We could talk about concrete forming or something like that, or talk about cattle behavior. Those are things that are just really super interesting. Let's go to the next slide. This is one of my most important slides because this is the different kinds of minds. And this is a big thing I'm working on now because I'm an object visualizer and I think completely in pictures. And our educational system with all the algebra requirements is screening us out. So in the new book I'm doing on visual thinking, which you can pre-order right now on Amazon, the thing I want to show is how we need our object visualizers to fix things, to prevent, disastrous industrial accidents. I said visual thinking is a different approach to problem solving. Then you have your mathematical thinkers, they're the visual spatial, and then you've got your verbal people. And a lot of education are verbal. We're going to talk about how these different kinds of thinking are different. And some people are mixtures of the different kinds of thinking. So we'll discuss some of the things some of these different kinds of minds can be good at on the next slide. A verbal thinker is very, very top down. You have a broad concept. Okay, we're talking about the importance of women getting equal pay. That's a broad concept. Now, to approach that from a more bottom-up approach, would be my approach, I start out, well, which industries are the worst on having unequal pay? I'm going to start figuring out where is this problem the worst. In other words, thinking about it in a more targeted way. See, a visual thinker is a bottom-up thinker. So I start to think about specific examples of individuals with autism that got really great jobs where it worked. And in a lot of the work that I've done on the big meat packing plants, in fact, I designed the front end of every Cargill beef plant in North America. Working on that kind of thing is something that is specific. So I want to just explain the difference between top-down verbal thinking and bottom-up visual thinking. And both types of minds work together, then we can really get a lot of great things done. Let's go to the next slide. Bottom-up thinking. So when I'm a very little kid, just to give you an idea of how bottom-up thinking works, is so when I'm 5 and I'm trying to figure out a cat, a horse from a dog, I sorted the animals by size. But then when a dachshund came into our neighborhood, that way of sorting animals no longer worked. So I had to find other features, so I don't think in words, that dachshunds share with dogs, such as barking, such as their smell, such as the shape of the nose, which would put the dachshund in the dog category. But the first step in the whole thing with the different kinds of thinking is recognizing that they exist. Like in the work that I did with a lot of the building things. So we'd sit in a job trailer and complain about how stupid the suits were. Well, the suits were verbal thinkers. Don't put a verbal thinker in charge of a construction project. They overgeneralize too much, and then they try to build things too fast, and you make gigantic mistakes. Let's go to the next slide. Well, let's look at how we achieve something like going to the moon. There were certain mission critical people. There were also certain women involved that didn't get enough credit until the 50th anniversary. And then a whole lot of things came out, people that should have gotten a lot more credit. I'm a total NASA geek. So we'll go to the next slide. It shows me the vehicle assembly building. And then I went and visited a launch pad that was under construction. This was about, you can go to that slide. That was about 4.5 years ago. You know what I learned? Maybe the right stuff rode to the moon, but the kids with the labels built the stuff. Like a guy with Tourette's syndrome, he was in charge of the project of building this launch pad. You see, then I go to an autism meeting and I've got a mom that is too scared to let her kid go shopping. And he's not learning any skills. He doesn't think he's capable of shopping. You see, this is where, and verbally, they get so locked into the label. You see, I'm seeing specific examples of people that own metal fabrication shops that I worked with that were probably autistic. So let's look at some mission critical expertise on the next slide. Of course, the famous Black mathematician, Katherine Johnson, horribly discriminated about. I think it's terrible that I didn't know about her until the movie Hidden Figures came out, but she was mission critical in doing hand calculations for the Mercury suborbital flights and the John Glenn, the first orbital flight. Absolutely mission critical. The mathematician, another mathematician is a guy, probably on the autism spectrum, and he did the algebra equations, which made it possible to land on the moon. And we'll go on to the next slide where we got to give some women credit. It really is the Playtex living spacesuit. And that didn't come out until relatively recently when a book called Spacesuit was written about the best bra seamstresses in the industry sewing the spacesuits. And their head designer formerly fixed televisions and certainly wasn't a degreed engineer. Yeah, it's really interesting when you start looking into things, who was responsible for making stuff. Let's go to the next slide, the Mars rover cameras. I'm very concerned we have a huge shortage of skilled trades today. Now since I think in specifics, I'm now seeing a lady electrician that I ran into it in the airport. And she was probably, she was an older person and really loving her job. And what's happening is we don't have young people going into things like electrical. There's tons of openings right now for electrical apprenticeships. When they were building our new chemistry building and remodeling our animal science building, both project managers told me that they had had difficulty getting electricians. Also, here's an interesting job path for a lady. Her name's Tina. And Tina ran the project for the chemistry building. She had a 4-year degree from CSU in political science, and she started answering phones for the construction company. Then she started bidding jobs. Next thing you know, she's running a job. And the reason why I put the Mars rover cameras up there was just to show the skilled trades that put those together. And that often doesn't get enough credit. It often doesn't. And we'll go on to the next slide, a picture of Mars. And then we'll go on and talk about my grandfather. And I use him as an example of the different kinds of minds. And he was an MIT trained mathematical engineer. He worked with another guy who was an autistic inventor, came up with this goofy idea on how to make an autopilot. Everybody in aviation thought it was stupid, but they worked together in a loft. They finally figured it out. But then they needed a verbal thinker. They should have gotten a lawyer, a verbal thinker, because their invention got ripped off. And the ripoff was in every plane during World War II. So that's just to show you that you really do need, different kinds of minds. And I think a lot of people, it's been amazing for me to learn more about how the verbal mind's totally different than my mind. And in the book Visual Thinking that I'm just reading the galley proofs right now. I just got finished up reading them before I came on. And Betsy Lerner, my co-author, total verbal thinker. So I'd write the rough draft initially, and then Betsy would reorganize it. And she's magical on how she reorganizes it. But she needs my material because I provide the specific details. Okay, Michelangelo on the next slide is an example of another person that dropped out of school at age 12, but exposed to great art and also exposed to stone cutting tools. How can you figure out what you might want to do if you're never exposed to anything? And then later on, mentoring. Oh, mentoring is so important. And I'll show you a couple more people, and then we're going to get into how I started my business. Okay, the next slide, Steve Jobs and Einstein. I was bullied horribly in high school, absolutely horribly. And the only places I was not bullied was horseback riding, model rockets, and electronics. I was one of these girls that was not the least bit interested in things like makeup, jewelry, or clothes. I thought all that stuff was boring. I wanted to go out and build things and do stuff like that. It's kind of stuff that I like to do. Einstein would land in an autism program today. And I try to make teachers think, what would happen to him today? This really concerns me. Let's go to the next slide. Thomas Edison, another person who's probably on the spectrum. Yeah, what's going on today? All right, okay, we're going to go to the next slide on the stuff we've taken out of the schools. Colorado's one of the worst right now. People ask me all the time, if I could do one thing to the schools, what would I do? I'd put back in all the hands-on classes, because a lot of the kids that are different, these are the classes where they can really show off their abilities and skills. When I was in elementary school, I loved art, sewing, and woodworking. In fact, I was the second girl to be allowed in woodworking class. Eleanor Motley, another little girl, and me, we kept pushing the principal to let us take woodworking and get out of cooking. I hated cooking class, but I loved woodworking. Playing musical instruments. Well, how can you tell if you can play a musical instrument if you never tried it? I tried musical instrument and I couldn't play a little flute, but at least I got exposed. Theater. I was not the least bit interested in acting in the play, but I made sceneries and costumes in elementary school, high school, and even in college when we had a variety show. You see, these are all things that can lead to careers. And when it comes to video game addicts, that's a real big problem in the autism field. One of the 4 people now have been weaned off of video games with car mechanics. And they found that car mechanics is a lot more interesting than video games are. And then writing. Writing was a very important part of my career. There is a scene in the HBO movie, Temple Grandin, where I go up to the editor of the magazine and I get his card. In other words, I saw that door to opportunity because I knew if I wrote for that magazine, that would really, really help my career. And then I produced decent articles. And I want to thank my teachers for red marking up my work and teaching me how to write. There's too many students today in graduate school, their writing skills are terrible, absolutely terrible. Just write up the methods of your experiment clearly so I understand, what you did, just basic writing skills. Gotten worse in the last, 7 or 8 years. And I'm not the only professor complaining about that. Let's get some skills that you can use. And what I did is I used writing to advertise my projects. I would design something and then I wrote about it. Okay, how do we figure out what kind of thinker people are, what kind of thinker a person is on the next slide? And visual thinkers like me, we like art, we like animals, but the other big thing is mechanics. That's another big thing for visual thinkers. When I go out and I do talks, you've got the people that set up all the equipment, audio equipment, sound equipment, audio visual equipment in these big convention centers. I've talked to people back there, the most positive or autistic, and doing a great job. And then you've got your mathematicians, your computer scientists, your music, your programming, your chemists, things of this sort. You need the whole team, and then you have your verbal thinkers. And we'll go on to the next slide. Okay, these are just some of the jobs. And let's look at something like Zoom. A visual thinker designs the interface to make the program easy to use, but the mathematicians have to make the program work. That's the different minds working together. Cannot emphasize that enough. And when I do my talks to businesses, I do a lot of talks to businesses. Oh, I was super happy. I had 1,000 people on a Zoom call with a major corporation. I was real happy about that. And I showed these same slides. I also can kind of do a different kind of way of presenting them. When I present them to businesses, I emphasize how we need, people with autism and with these different skills for the business. You need them to make the business work. Let's go to the next slide. You also having the creative classes also made a scientist more likely to win a Nobel Prize. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about how I got started in my business. There's another slide that says when you're weird. What I learned is I had to show off my work. I would show off my work. I learned to sell my work, not myself. And we'll go on, I'll show you some of the work I showed off. That's one of my drawings. An interview for me was lay the drawings out on the table and let the work do the selling. It was sell my work, not myself. And I see a lot of parents of autistic kids where they say, my kid's a beautiful artist, but they don't think to have their kids' artwork on their phone to show it off. Because the other thing I had to learn is to take my ability in designing and had design stuff people want. And that goes back to when I was in high school and I started a little sign painting business. And the first sign I sold was for a beauty shop. And I had to make a sign a beauty shop wants. That's learning very basic work skills. The next slide just shows the drawing I used to sell the Cargill Corporation on having me design their facilities. This is the drawing that got sent to Mr. Fielding. And why did I put on that? You have to touch to perceive. I watched the industry go from hand drafting to computerized drafting. And I started seeing strange mistakes on drawings. People are leaving out detail. That's another drawing that I sent to Mr. Fielding. Basically, what you want to do is just give them a 30-second wow. I simply showed the work off. That's what I did. And then after I just did a project, I'd write about it in the trade magazines. And I do a lot of stuff where I didn't write ad copy. I would just write about how do you actually design things? How do you actually do things? That's what I did. The next slide just shows the replica of one of the facilities that I designed that was built for the movie. I love the fact the movie had all my projects on it. Just love it. And the next slide shows my brochure. I'm very professional. I never disclosed autism. And with a name like Temple Grandin, sometimes they just didn't know I was a woman until I showed up or I called them. Now, the airport has forced me to put Mary Temple Grandin on my plane tickets. And so now I just got a thing from Delta Airlines credit card for Mary Grandin. They took the Mary Temple off, but I have to use my passport name now. But having a name like Temple Grandin, I was writing a lot of articles, and some of the people in the beginning, I don't think they knew I was a woman. And then also in the academic press, back then it was normal to do your authorships T. Grandin or J. Smith, using first initials. They seem to be getting away from that now, but that used to be the normal way for authorship of journal articles. Next slide just shows a black and white picture of there's another picture I sent to Mr. Fielding just to show you the stuff I put in the portfolio. Next slide shows another picture of one of my projects, showing the stuff off. Now, the thing that I got to thinking about is who builds stuff like big processing plants? Who builds factories? All different kinds of factories. And the next slide just asks that question. And what I found, and I was out living on these construction projects back when it was Moffat's and Cargill was the XL plant, and Tyson was IVP. The same plants are still there. They just changed ownership. But what I found on the jobs where I spent substantial amounts of time on the project is the visual thinkers. Somebody labeled draftsman or drafting technician was laying out an entire factory. Now, when it comes to pay, the pay was terrible. Draftsman did not get very good pay compared to the degreed engineer, but he was laying out total plants. Also, the visual thinkers do all the specialized mechanical equipment. You might have a guy that owns a small shop, owns a big shop, and they're designing stuff and selling it all around the world. And then the mathematical university trained engineers who got more pay, they do things like the make sure the roof doesn't collapse, boilers, refrigeration, making sure that stuff, runs. But there were a lot of people I worked with that these jobs are not getting replaced. These people are aging out. We need people to fix things. I was at the airport the other day. The elevator was broken in the parking garage. I had to climb up the stairs with my luggage. And also the escalator, which is always broken. I was an older guy fixing it. You see, and as I look at these things, we need people to fix escalators, and they're not getting replaced. Let's go to the next slide. I'm going to guess that 20% of the people I worked with were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD. They owned companies, multiple patents, designing and building equipment. That is what they did. And I'm very, very concerned right now about skills loss. This is something I'm like really pushing when I talk to the business people. I use the same set of slides, but put a much, much bigger business emphasis on it. The next slide shows state-of-the-art pork processing plant. Every piece of equipment you see in that room's imported either from Quebec or Holland. Why is Holland doing all of this stuff? Well, it's because they've kept their skilled trades. That's why Holland is doing all of this stuff. They also have made the state-of-the-art electronic chip making machine. We invented it, they built it. We no longer make the state-of-the-art electron microscope either. That's from Zeiss, Germany. Just got to go visit one about a month ago. Let's go to the next slide and look at something like the Steve Jobs Theater. Structural glass walls, they're from Italy and Germany. We're not making this stuff. And the next slide just shows the parachute on the Mars rover. That's another thing that we're not making. Now, the other thing I've had to do with what I do is get targeted. Okay, like Gloria, the previous speaker, her targeted thing is women's pay. That's fine. That's fine. Now, and that's good. We need that. But on the other hand, I'm pretty sure on a lot of things I didn't get paid what I should have gotten paid. But you see, my goal was improving the industry. You have to kind of pick your battles. You can't do both because they tend to clash with each other. You kind of got to pick out what is your prime directive. I'm a Star Trek fan, so I understand prime directive. And I know there were situations where my pay was less, but I had to decide which battle I was going to fight. And I wanted to work on improving how cattle were treated. And in autism right now, my main thing is getting kids into good careers. That is my main thing right now. And I'm not getting involved in stuff that could hurt that goal. I'm seeing too many smart kids going nowhere because nobody thinks they can do anything now they've got an autism label. And I worked with a guy who owns a gigantic factory who started out dirt poor washing equipment, has a corporate jet. I've been on it. Well, he'd be playing video games in the basement now. This is what makes me get kind of crazy as I go back and forth between the different worlds. So I kind of have to pick out that in autism, I want to help young people get into good jobs, careers. And on the livestock front, I want to work on how animals are treated. Now, if I get out there and I fight too many different battles, they interfere with each other. People ask me, how were you effective in what you did? Well, I kept my things relatively targeted. I don't get involved in politics. Yes, I have my opinions. I vote, that's private, period. Because if I get involved in politics, that interferes with things my prime directive. I want to see that kid that's playing video games discover that auto mechanics is a lot more fun than those stupid games. Let's go to the next slide. Let's just give you some tips if you're working with people on the spectrum or somebody's got a learning difference. I don't have any working memory. Don't stick me on the crazy busy McDonald's takeout window. That's not going to work. Multitasking, that's not, you see the jobs that are doing designing, that doesn't involve any multitasking. Or let's say you're fixing cars. You're working one vehicle at a time. That's not multitasking. The other thing is I cannot remember long strings of verbal instruction. Like, let's say I have to clean up the ice cream machine at McDonald's. Okay, let me make a pilot's checklist of the steps. I have no working memory, but I have lots and lots and lots of long-term memory. And vague instructions don't work. Don't say, tidy up the shelves in the store. You need to say, okay, like I went in and I get another COVID shot yesterday because I'm going to Europe and they require it. And so I'm sitting there looking at the cosmetics shelf on behind this little screen at King Soopers, and I'm seeing how different cosmetics were lined up with the price tags, and they were missing half their stock on things like mascara, which I have to say is a product I have no interest in, but that's what I looked at while I was waiting to get my COVID shot. You see, now I kind of play it back like a little video. And then the last slide I'm going to show right now, and then we're going to just get into questions. What is the ultimate goal of education? Where is a student 10 years after high school graduation? I was designing those dipping vat projects. I was out there, building things. Yeah, pay probably was lower, but I had to pick, I'm going to work on improving the cattle industry. And fortunately, I had enough money to live on. Got to have that. Okay, let's open it up for questions. I'm going to open the Q&A up right now, and we'll start answering them. Okay, now wait a minute. This is looks like it's for the previous speaker.
Temple, those are from the last speaker. I don't see any yet for.
Well, I'm going to pick somebody. There's some, I see boxes here, black boxes with names on them. And I'd like to just pick somebody. They certainly have some questions. I find that I have to get the questions started.
Kemptel, I'm Susan Brody. I've been the program planner for this event, and I do have a couple to start with, and maybe.
All right, let's start with them.
Yep, and one of my questions is changing our school system. This is probably broader than anything AAUW could do, but in Europe they have a point at which students go into a technical.
Yes, that's right, ninth grade.
Yep, and then they don't, and they go into a more academic. Do you think that the United States could do something like that? Because without somehow finding out what people need, well, and then giving them a new track, what do you think?
Well, the thing is, I've found is I'm seeing kids today growing up who have never used a tool. I have my livestock handling class, and the students have to make a scale drawing. I had a girl last year who had never used a ruler in her life to measure anything. People growing up totally without, contact with the practical stuff. How can you find out you like tools if you never tried them? I think a lot of kids aren't getting exposed to enough stuff to figure out what they might want to do. You see, and I think that's a real serious problem. And when we were out there building Cargill plants, I remember when they remodeled Fort Morgan back in the early 90s, they did a big expansion, and I was over on that job all the time. And you're talking about, okay, I had my cattle handling stuff, but the rest of the plant, I was walking around the whole project, and you're talking about complicated stuff, that skilled trades were inventing. Yep. I'm not talking about laying floor tiles. I'm talking about really high-end skilled trades where you invent stuff. You have patents. And what I'm seeing with some of the autistic kids is they're graduating from college and they can't get jobs because they never learn any work skills. This is something I have to fight with parents all the time, is get their kid out somewhere where they can learn some work skills.
I agree with you. Yep. I hear what you're saying. And I feel like part of our challenge is that the generation of teachers that we have today is not prepared to actually implement these needed perspectives with regard to what other skills students need.
Well, okay, the question here from Claudia is, how can we make skilled trades respectable and be returned to the schools? You do it one school at a time and you write about it. That's the bottom-up approach. Now, I've been to some very innovative schools with some very innovative people running them. Recently have been to them. And you know what? These innovative people don't know how to write up about how they fixed their school. They don't write about it. And I didn't realize until about 5 years ago, in terms of improving things in the cattle industry, that writing was such an important part of it. I wrote about my stuff. And And a lot of people that are very good with animals, or they're just very good teachers, they don't know how to write up the how to. You see, now this would need some different kinds of minds. You have the creative principal that's doing this really good school, and then someone else could write up about it.
Yeah,
And
I
then
do.
what you have
yeah.
to do too, that I learned.
And your
Okay, I would
schools-
write about a lot of cattle handling stuff that was sort of the same kind of stuff. But I'd write about it, well, here's the system we did this ranch. And then I'd write something about the ranch. You see, it
I
was
hear
a
you.
total bottom-up approach. It was not top-down. But
Your
the thing is,
questions
this
are
innovative
starting.
school exists and nobody knows about it hardly.
Yeah. You have a question starting on number 10. I think it's Nancy Holt wants to know the name of your book.
Oh, the book that's going to be, that we're doing the galley proofs right now is called Visual Thinking. Visual Thinking. And you can just go on Amazon and type in Visual Thinking Temple Grandin. You'll need to put the name in along with it. Visual Thinking Temple Grandin. You can pre-order
Great.
right now. And yeah, there's a tendency to stick your nose up at skilled trades, but I don't know. We had a broken elevator and a broken escalator 2 days ago at the Denver airport. Somebody's got to fix this stuff. And the thing is that, and also design it. Let's talk about elevators. We don't make them anymore. It's another thing we've stopped making. Check out the names. Rupp, that's a big European elevator company. I check nameplates on equipment. Schindler. Okay, brand new hotel, have a Schindler in it. That's not from the US. What happened to Otis? That's the old US brand for elevators. I'll find those in old hotels. You see, now that's checking details. Yeah, I'll look at nameplates on elevators. It's not something that most people do, but you collect enough data on that, you're going to find out that that's, there's something's going on here and it's not good. And goes back to sticking the nose up at the skilled trades, because we're not forming the little shops that turn into big shops, that turn into big equipment companies.
Jane Miller asks, Temple, aren't things actually better now in education because teachers are aware of autism and they've been trained to work with these students and don't think they're just lazy or stupid?
Well, there's good things. We're doing much better with our little kids. Much better. Little kids is where we're doing just super. Because I was the kind of little kid at age 3 with no speech that I used to just throw away at an institution. So our little kids programs are way better. But where we're falling down is learning the work skills and making a transfer into work. And I don't know how many people I worked with when we were over there at the Cargill plant and other places. Well, it was XL back then. That started out a little shop that grew into a big shop. And those shops are not forming now. There are a few exceptions. We've got one shop right in the oil patch where they learn welding in the oil patch. And then they build a beef plant. Okay, but pork and poultry, it's all imported now.
Darcy asks, she's interested in early childhood education for underserved children. Do you have suggestions about how to identify the different different mind, as you say, at an early age?
Well, you're not going to identify them in 2-year-olds.
Okay.
And usually, there's once in a while you'll find a 4-year-old that will get really into math and patterns. But my art ability showed up a little, more like 7 is when my art ability became obvious. With little kids, I always have, parents ask me what's really important. I want to say speech, turn taking at games, and then skills like brushing your teeth, washing your hands, dressing, and then the kids should like going to therapy. Now, what do I do when I go to a low income area and there's no services? Well, I have another book called The Way I See It. This is my how-to book. A lot of stuff in here, how to work with little kids. Get the grandmothers in the community out there and start working with this kid now.
So somewhere between 4 and 7 is what I hear you saying.
That's right. Between 4 and 7 is where you're going to see it. You're not going to see it in the real little ones. And then the problem with autism now is they keep changing the guidelines. You see, in the 80s, to be labeled autism, you had to have speech delay. Then in the early 90s, they added the Asperger's, which is socially awkward with no speech delay. And then in 2013, they put the whole thing together. So now you have this big, huge continuum going from Elon Musk to somebody who can't dress themselves that remains nonverbal. And they need very different services. But I'm actually seeing on the fully verbal end of the spectrum, worse, the video game addiction stuff is really bad. And moms that get afraid to let go when I suggest her 16-year-old to go in the store and buy something by himself.
Well, what I hear you saying is also you need to work with parents. We have Mary here asking, how do you decide where to expose your child or grandchild to hands-on things if you live in a city environment?
Well, even in a city environment, you know, when they had things like cooking, sewing, woodworking, carpentry, they had those classes, then you got exposed.
Yeah.
Then you got exposed to them. You get exposed to them at school. But I'm seeing too many kids with an autism label. He's 16 years old now, fully verbal, building elaborate trains out of Legos, and nobody thought to introduce tools. You see, this is where you get locked into the label. All right, or let's give another example. It's not skilled traits. Let's give a computer science example. See, my mind thinks in specific examples. So you got some parents that are programmers, and their kid is 8 years old and a little math whiz, and they don't think to teach their son programming. They're so locked into the label, they don't think to teach their kid programming. And when I suggested it, they go, oh, that's a good idea. We hadn't thought of that. That's label locking.
Aha. Okay. Donna asks, I have a 21-year-old autistic grandson who needs training for a job, has let go at King Soopers, was let go at King Soopers, was let go at Amazon. Are there other options available?
Right now, I need to, first of all, I need to find out why. Why did Amazon, was it the warehouse? I've got to find out exactly what the jobs were. I assume it's in the warehouse at Amazon. And then King Soopers, it's probably going to be bagging groceries or shelving. Okay, let's look at basics. Did he show up for work on time? Was he a dirty slob? Because I can tell you there's a scene in the movie where they slam the deodorant down and say, you stink, use it. All right, let's look at, were those two basics part of the problem with not keeping a job? And the other thing we have to be careful about is multitasking. Okay, I know at Amazon they do some of the jobs require more multitasking. There's others where you walk with the scanner, but you walk in the warehouse a whole lot. That wouldn't be so much multitasking. I need more information on why he was let go. You see, this is where we overgeneralize. Now, being late is a common reason being let go. Telling off the boss. Now, when I was at the Farm Arrangement magazine, I almost got let go when the business changed ownership. When a boss changes, this can often be a problem for someone on the spectrum. And we got a new boss, and Jim thought it was really weird. And then Susie, the lady who did graphic design for the magazine, I'm pretty sure she was autistic. And she says, we got to get a portfolio together of all your articles. Jim's going to fire you. So we got this big scrapbook together of all of my articles. Again, that's showing the work, and Jim gave me a raise. But I didn't recognize the warning signs, and Susie did. But I want to find out what, okay, I could maybe at the King Soopers, there'd be more social issues. What's going on at the Amazon warehouse? I want to find out exactly. Now, maybe he can't, some of those jobs require a lot of walking, and some don't. Where the robots come up to you, that's more multitasking. But I could help you if you could tell me what the problem was.
Do you have, it seems like you're opening yourself up to a lot of emails. Would you be willing to take an email from, I think it's Donna?
Yeah, I would, because I need to know. That's 3 jobs. And now multitasking, I want to avoid that. Like the busy McDonald's takeout window, but bagging groceries isn't that shouldn't be a problem with multitasking. Okay. And then let's say he has to shelf groceries and he's putting them in front of the wrong play stuff. I got to find out what's going on here.
What I'd like to recommend here is Donna, would you get in touch with me and I'll send you Temple's email and you can send her some.
Yeah, I would like, I need to find out, but the point, what happens on this is that you overgeneralize.
Yeah.
I'm
going to go on.
Let me tell you another one I just heard about yesterday. A guy refused to work at an ice cream shop because he didn't like his hand being cold scooping ice cream. And I said, get a glove. Okay, that is something specific where there was a problem at an ice cream shop. I was just helping on some job stuff just the other day. This was like 2 days ago. But I needed to know what was the problem at the ice cream shop. Well, he didn't like his hand getting cold. Well,
I got it.
Yeah, I got to find out the specifics.
It's that specific. So we'll get you some
specific
connection. Could you move on to Wanda, who would like to know what you're currently teaching and what career advice you'd give to your students?
Well, I'm doing my livestock handling class that I've done for 31 years. And when it comes to career advice, I've helped students, get jobs. Some of my students, if they wanted a variety of different things, working in the beef industry. I've got 3 professors, Lily Callaway Edwards, Ruth Wody, and Kurt Vogel. I've got 3 students out as professors. I'm really happy about that. But I've got another one basically runs the fab at a beef plant. Others that do a lab animal care and use committee stuff. I work in animal welfare for big corporations. I always recommend to my students to go to meetings because that's where you meet people. COVID's damaged that, not getting out and meeting people. I try to work on help my students get placed in decent jobs. I mean, when it comes to me, there's all this identity stuff that's going on now. I can tell you, autism is my secondary identity. Career, having an interesting career, that's my basic identity. I mean, that's the way that I'm going. Other people are going to pick something else, but it's career for me.
I'm going to ask you to comment on Janet Knox's question. Have you heard of the Minnesota Independence College and Community? She has a friend with an adult child who attends, and they're very happy with the program.
Good. Well, good. That's good. And this is just an example of something that people are doing. Another one's Mercyhurst College. I've been visiting with them. And one of the things they do while the students are in college is they make them get jobs while they're in college. So you have a slow transition from the world of school to the world of work. Okay, and if this thing in Minnesota is working really well, great. Great.
I hear you. That's a good comment. Have you spoken to boards of education or national education? Seems like that part of what you're suggesting needs to impact the teacher's expertise and the teacher's skills.
Well, the teachers are stuck teaching the stuff they got to teach.
Yeah.
I'm finding that, businesses, have a lot to do with what goes into community colleges. But one of the problems we have on a lot of career stuff is the community college is almost too late to introduce some of these kids. They find out they're like, especially on the skilled trade stuff where we got a huge shortage. So now I'm dragging my bags up the second floor of the parking garage and not being very happy about it. You see, that's how my mind works.
Okay, I've got one
specifics, and then as you get more and more specific information, then you start to put things into categories, stuff that works and stuff doesn't work. Okay, you have you start a new program on independence, and you're not sure, how do they work out? What they do at Mercyhurst is they let them live in the dorm for the first couple of years, and then they want them in off-campus housing and a job, plus going to college, maybe a lighter load. You see, you've got to make that transition so you're not just suddenly trying to change. Sudden changes are bad in autism.
I'd like to introduce a question that has to do with AAUW as an organization. We've got a lot of parents here who are interested in their own children and in their own families, and I can understand that. But as AAUW, as an organization who cares about education, has always been part of our mission, and we're all particularly focused on women's education, girls and being successful coming out of their high school and then graduate degrees. Do you see some way our programs or what we're doing could benefit your, is it in testing that we need to look? Is it in just educating people about the different minds? What are your thoughts about
educating people about the different minds? But the other thing I'm finding, how do people get into careers? Because I've seen people come right out at a meat plant, in meat plants, working in construction. I found people coming right out of very low income situations, learning every job on the floor. You can do that at the Amazon warehouse. You know, I can't do algebra. And I've often thought, what if someone waved a magic wand and I'm now 18 years old, dirt poor, but I still have my knowledge that I have right now, my 70 years of knowledge. I'd head straight for that Amazon warehouse. And I'll tell you exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to learn every job on the floor, but I'm not going to be the top picker because people hate me. I want to be like at about 85, you know, in the top 20%. You learn every job on the floor, and then I'm going to try to gravitate over towards the robots. Maybe I can get involved in their space program. Big corporations, you've got a lot of flexibility. I've also learned now how to not get involved in things that are going to get me trouble and get me fired. And but in a big corporation, there's a lot of room to move around. People don't see the door, but you're going to have to pay your dues. You got to learn every job on the floor. And I've seen that in a meatpacking plant. I saw a lady, again, specific example, had dinner with her. She's probably 60 now. She went to work at a beef plant, good and far away from here in the US. They gave her the worst job on the floor. I mean, the worst job on the floor. They were going to run her off. And she learned every job on that floor, and she ended up running the entire floor. Okay, I've seen that kind of career path all the time. So you could become a manager of the plant, or at least a big department, or you gravitate over to maintenance, and then 15 years later, you get to play with Legos with a crane to build the new addition. I've seen that. And so if I was dirt poor, and the other thing is health insurance benefits, I'm going to have that in the Amazon warehouse. I went 10 years in my 20s with no health insurance. I was very, very lucky. I didn't get seriously hurt. Very lucky.
So it sounds like it takes patience and curiosity and initiative.
Well, the other thing is you have to pick, you know, okay, my brother, you see, let's say you get a job someplace and you find out there's something nasty going on in there. And then you've got to figure out, am I going to get involved in this? Now, I had a job where I was designing equipment, but I was also doing the company's advertising, and they were having me buy ads I knew they wouldn't pay for. That's a situation where I quit. My brother got into a situation where he was working for a bank, and he was ripping, they instructed him to rip off money from the state of New York. He quit. You know, sometimes it's better to just quit than blow the whistle. You see, you have to figure out now which battle do you really want to fight. So any big company, I don't care what it does, you're going to have a certain amount of stuff that's going on that's either stupid or maybe not real wonderful. And the thing I found, the difference between a good corporation and a bad one is less of this nonsense goes on. But there's always going to be a certain amount of dumb stuff they do, or somebody's, you know, then you get into the safety things. Oh man, I can remember before we had lockout tagout in the accidents. Lockout tagout means that you put a lock on the hamburger machine so that when you're cleaning it, somebody else doesn't turn it on. Okay, we'll just leave it at that. Lockout tagout. It's very, very strictly enforced now. Very, very strict.
I can see where you'd need that. That would be definitely critical.
Yes, because that's the end of you. Or you end up in 3 truckloads of grain or some other really, really awful thing.
Awful, awful. I feel like we've used up the Q&A questions, Temple. Do you have any, we're a little early, but do you have any last comments that you'd like to share about your experience and your own life that AEW has always been supportive
No,
of women.
I was one of these people where career, okay, let's say we had the Gloria talked about women's pay. Okay, I know I was in situations where my pay was not comparable, but I had to pick which battle to fight. And she's picked pay, fine. I'm picking that I wanted to make a positive difference and change things in the cattle industry. You see, because the problem is if you try to do both, it doesn't work very well. That's one of the things I learned. You have to pick out, you tend to be the most effective if you pick out something very targeted. Her thing is pay, fine, that's her thing. That's fine. That's her prime directive. And I figured if I got in fights over pay, I wouldn't have been able to do some of the things to improve the cattle industry that I did.
If you were looking around today, what would you focus on, or would you target any particular industry? Or
well, right now, I'm really into the different kinds of mines.
Right.
I'm very concerned about the loss of skills. And I went to 3 places in 2019, a pork plant, a poultry plant. Usually I do beef. And we actually know how to build beef. And that's because we got millwrights coming out of the oil patch. It's the reason why. But pork and chicken, we don't know how to build. I was horrified. 100 shipping containers for chicken processing equipment. Then I went to the Steve Jobs Theater. I was horrified. Then I was reading The Economist, found out about the chip making machine. Now, I don't mean potato chips, electronic chips, state-of-the-art machine. And I'm going, we got a problem here. And it's going back to skilled trades. It's also going back to my kind of mind that can't do algebra, and we're getting screened out. Well, what did I do? I couldn't graduate from high school today. Let's say I lived in California, I head straight to the Amazon warehouse. And I can tell you right now, I know enough about industry to know that what goes on in there is very similar to a meat plant, but it's a lot cleaner. It's a lot less messy. Well, actually, meat packing plants are clean. They are clean, but they're messier. But also, they have a space program. And that was my childhood interest. Yes. There actually was a guy, no, this was a guy, got a job in an Amazon warehouse, had lunch with the rocket scientist. Now he's working on that. But there's all kinds of, I'd be interested in, designing mechanical stuff on robots. And they have those, okay, 15 years from now, I'd like to design the warehouse of the future. And you know what? That's a doable goal. And I now know how to like work the system so that I'm not going to get in fights with people on the floor. Like, don't be the absolute best picker and show up. I want to be a really good picker. That's probably wonder what a picker is. That's the person that grabs the merchandise, puts the merchandise in the box, the right stuff. But I want to be in the top 20% of pickers, but not absolutely the best because they'll hate my guts. That's something I've learned. But it's and the other thing I've learned is no matter where you work, there's always going to be a certain amount of bad stuff that goes on. Now, where I personally draw the line, buying advertising that I knew my employer was not going to pay for, I draw the line at that. I'm not going to do that. But let's say somebody else is buying the ads that aren't getting paid for, as long as I keep out of it, I've got my prime directive of making things better for cattle. But I'm not personally going to buy ads that I knew they weren't going to pay for.
Well, I have to say, Temple, you have been a remarkable contributor today. And I just really appreciate the history of your work life and your career and your thinking. Look forward to what future things that you come up with.
Well, my big thing now is the different kinds of minds. And the thing I really want to work out is how they work together. Let's go back to my grandfather's compass.
Yeah.
So we had the weird autistic guy, visual thinker, come up with this goofy new idea. My grandfather, MIT trained engineer, mathematician. Well, they needed a suit. They needed a lawyer because it got ripped off.
Yeah. And
this is where you need all three. If they'd had a lawyer, I don't know, we'd be billionaires. My grandfather did finally get a nice settlement with the Sperry Corporation so he could live very comfortably in a beautiful apartment in Cambridge. He should have made a vast fortune.
Yeah. Well, and you see, this is where this fits into our topic for today, which is inclusion and belonging. Our focus in AAUW now has included DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And inclusion is what's needed with these different minds. Knowing each one of them is important, but having them
You
be
know what I'm doing? I'm finding, how did I get people to be nicer to their cattle? Oh, I let them know how much money they could save. They put in my facility, they could take out one person, I can cut your workman's comp claims down. That's how I sold jobs. You see,
Wow.
and right now, I'm on, when it comes to the different mines, I'm telling corporations, you need these mines. You need them, so you need these skills, like to design an interface for Zoom, you know, these sort of things.
Yeah.
You need all the different kinds of minds. And yeah, and what happens with startups? Okay, let's say you have a little shop and he's not that organized. Now he's starting into a big shop. He's got to hire a suit to keep things orderly.
Yep.
Okay, and that suit is, maybe that's a kind of derogatory term for verbal thinker. And at the time that I just threw that word around in the job trailer, and so did everybody else, I didn't even think about a suit being a verbal thinker. You see, now I am learning, you know, so much more. But I don't think the suits should totally run the show, though.
No.
You
And
see,
that
and
open mind.
that's what's going on right now in education. It's totally verbal. Okay, inclusion. Okay, but my approach is more bottom up. Here's specific examples of how inclusion worked really super well. Here's
Right.
where we had a big mess. And then my mind then looks for common factors. I did that with cattle handling design. I went to 30 feed yards in Arizona when I first started, and I worked cattle. And then I took all the good design bits and put them together and threw out all the bad design bits. It was
Temple,
totally
I've got to
bottom-up
move
approach.
on. We are now at the end of our time for your participation, and I really appreciate everything you've shared. And we are now going to move on back to Joan, our president, and have a break. So thank you.
Well, and
so
I'm going to have to go because we have our spring branding up at the horse center, and
Well,
I'm
go.
going up
That
there
sounds
right
like-
now.
What a great opportunity for us all. So thank you. I'm going to bring Joan back on. Temple, I can't thank you enough for being
Okay,
here
well,
with
great to talk to you. I'm going to leave the meeting. Thank you for having me. And
You're welcome.
I'm really glad I listened to some of Gloria's talk, because as I
Me
looked at
too.
that, I said, her thing is pay, fine. Then you work on that, and then that's something that's targeted where you can get stuff done.
I appreciate it. Talk to
Okay,
you
we'll
soon.
see you. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Well, my goodness, I certainly learned a lot with that presentation, and I hope you all did too.